Parliament Radio 105.5 FM.
Honorable Deputy Speaker.
Could we resume? I recognize member for Moruga.
Good evening. I know it's me. Good evening, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Good evening to all members of the House. I rise, it's with great pleasure I rise to add my 2 cents to this debate on the Act to amend the Strategic Services Amendment Bill. I have to say with all honesty that it was not my intention to make any statement at all this afternoon. Not because I believe that the issues to be discussed are outside of my purview, but because I felt that there are sufficient members on this side to have done so perhaps more effectively than me. If one looks at the membership on the government benches, we have people who have decades of service in terms of policing at a leadership position, in fact, one of the highest leadership positions. We have people who've had decades of service in the military, also at the highest leadership positions. We also have people who have substantial legal acumen, substantial legal accolades behind their name. And I was quite content to leave the discussion of this very important act to them. But regardless of that, it is still a pleasure to stand and speak on one hand on behalf of my constituency, as I have always pledged to do, but also as a member of government. This has been a very interesting debate, particularly this afternoon. I have been very intrigued by the statements, by the things that were said by those in the opposition benches. I had more than a few eyebrow-raising moments. It is not every day that one sits in a parliament in Trinidad and hears a reference to Nazi Germany with a comparison between an act in this parliament and something that would have been done at, I suppose, the cusp of World War II. It is not every day that one stands and listens to a member make a comparison between an act in Trinidad and something done in the Russian Federation. Another stretch that almost stretched my incredulity to the limit was hearing a comparison between Trinidad and Uganda. This is not the kind of fear one hears every day. In fact, I have been listening to a number of mixed metaphors, unhinged anecdotes, historical allusions out of place, speaking beyond context. It has been surreal and amazing. And if that's the case, then I might as well add my voice to the chorus. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I love Parliament. I love debating. The cut and thrust of speaking here intrigues me. So it is my intention that you will never at any point see me sleeping here, because this is, to me, very interesting and very intriguing. But There is proof that every rule has an exception. Today is perhaps an exception to that. Today, we are in the midst of debating a very important bill. A very important bill in the midst of a very interesting historical context. And I expected that, or maybe foolishly, I expected that to be treated with some level of gravitas. So I expected a certain caliber of discourse and discussion this evening. And what I have heard from the opposition benches has been, in my own estimation, tremendously wanting. Now, I could stand here and add more than a grain of sense to state why this bill is significant, to talk about its intricacies, the changes that it intends to make, the potential ramifications of them. I could do that just as well as any other member on this side, but that has already been done, and it has been done sufficiently. So I'm going to do something else. I'm going to reduce this to minutia, because it is easy to forget, but tremendously important to remember that government policy has tangible ramifications, has serious tangible ramifications. And the things that we do or don't do, discuss or don't discuss, vet or don't vet, analyze or fail to critically analyze, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has tremendous ramifications for the 1.3 million people of this beloved republic of ours. And I will use my constituency to give some context, some much needed context to the discussion this evening. Because what we are discussing in terms of this bill, it has ramifications for people who live on the ground. It might pain me to admit, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that there is something that myself and the Honorable Member for Napima have in common. It is that we are from the same community of Moruga Tableland, more specifically Moruga. Everyone in this nation knows that this is a tremendously rural community. So notions of crime and criminality don't really register or resonate deeply with people from that community, or traditionally did not. In fact, if one hails from Moruga Tableland, the idea of crime is something prosaic. So in my former profession, when I was a lecturer, I was involved in a very interesting oral history project where I interviewed people about their lives. And of course, I really do believe that charity begins at home and ends abroad. So I went around interviewing people, and one of the issues I discussed with them was their attitudes to crime. And in that constituency, for most of its history, when you're talking a serious crime, you're talking about probably stealing a yard fowl or riding a bicycle without reflectors, or another case which I will not mention in here because you will be forced to castigate me, so I will not go that way. But basically, things that are perhaps more romantic than serious in nature, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So much so that last year, at the cusp of the election, during the heat of the election period, there was a survey done in Moruga Tableland as to what national circumstances or what community circumstances people found most disturbing. And I was surprised, I was tremendously surprised to note that the respondents in my constituency from my community said crime. In fact, my response was to laugh. I laughed because I have that romantic and prosaic view of what crime is in Moruga Tableland. And at that time, the idea of crime being a scourge in Moruga was something unthinkable. Subsequent to that, I have, of course, been proven wrong. I have had the distinct displeasure of having to record that in the last, perhaps 8 months, we have had a scourge of crime in Moruga Tableland that has been unprecedented in the history of my constituency and my community. In fact, we've recorded at this point, if my rudimentary maths is decent or sufficient, something like perhaps 10 murders in 10 months. That's a minute number perhaps by national standards, but in terms of my constituency and my community, it is a number unheard of. In fact, in the last 10 months, we've probably had more murders than we've had in the last 50 years in my constituency. I contrast that with my childhood when my mother, for whatever reason, deeming it knowledge worth knowing, recounted to me one day every single murder she could remember and details concerning them. And it wasn't a very long discussion, because in my constituency, this is not something that one thinks about. But this situation has now come to my constituency, has now come to my door. And the end result of that is that in a very short time, I've lost a classmate, I've lost someone who attended school with me, I've lost a former student, all of whom have been murdered. Now, this has had tremendous ramifications in my community. I am not accustomed to living in fear. In fact, the house I grew up in has no burglar proofing. In fact, it's customary for people in my community to leave their homes and leave their windows and doors unlocked. It is, thank you so much, Honorable Member for Barataria, San Juan. Your advice is truly, truly appreciated, if totally redundant. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am not accustomed to living and being concerned with this thing called security. It has been an alien concept. But now, the people in my community actually live in fear. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I had the singular displeasure of attending the funeral of one of the very young people who campaigned with me during the last campaign. He was murdered. He was shot to death. And I went to a funeral where an entire community came together and literally standing there, amidst all the pain and all the anguish that one could observe, I could also palpably sense their fear. So much so that I was constrained to go and speak and try to reassure them that the circumstances that they were facing, which so alien to them and their culture, would not go unaddressed. And the next day when we had Parliament, I came to the Parliament and I spoke with the Minister of National Security, asking him to lend me some support in that constituency, if only to allay the fears of my constituents. Now, why am I telling you this story? Because I'm sure any member here could recount to you something similar. It's because crime is only abstract until it affects us. Crime is not an abstract discussion that we come here and we bandy around things that we don't understand. Encroaching dictatorship. Creeping this, well, I'm adding a word that you might not know, so you'll learn to. Encroaching dictatorship, creeping dictatorship. Cliches that have no meaning beyond the context or are used outside of the context in which they are meant. But, Honorable Member.
Members, I would like to hear the discourse of
Speed up.
If it's to make you happy, I'll go even slower. Yeah. Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Crime is only an abstract idea when it's bandied about and you try to score political points. But the things that we discuss here have tangible impacts. Now, one of the reasons why a very, very rural community which has no history of violent crime is suddenly facing a scourge of crime, it's because of the fact that Moruga is a coastal community. It has an open coastline. And I have stood here and argued that maybe if we had done what we should have done and ordered the OPVs, we might have been more protected. And then the illegal guns creeping into my community might not be there in the volume that they are. Just perhaps, Mr. Deputy Speaker, perhaps. Now, I know enough not to assume that one singular cause is going to make an entire cultural change. But the point I'm trying to make in the larger context is that when we make policy, it has impacts. And I will say to the honorable member for Barataria San Juan and the equally honorable member for Naparima, when we don't make policy, it also has tangible impacts. Why? How? Mr. Deputy Speaker, we all have to face a reality that we are facing a scourge of crime in this nation that is unprecedented. We have never faced anything like this in our short history as an independent nation or in our longer history as a society. Perfect frankness, total honesty will say that crime, corruption, criminality, the evasion of the law have been parts of our culture since there has been something called Trinidad and Tobago. And I can give you a number of historical examples. Few people know today that the Red House building that we all would like to return to as quickly as possible, the first building, there was a roof on that building that had to be removed after it was constructed. The first roof of the Red House had to be removed. Why? Because the person selected to build the building was a joiner, not an architect. So he put on a roof that was too heavy because he was related to somebody in government, and he got a contract that he did not deserve to have. So at the great cost of the taxpayers back then, they had to remove the entire roof and replace it with another roof. I could explain, for example, why there is something called a potong in Trinidad. There was once a law stating that if you had a dog of pedigree, that you had to pay a tax. So that Trinidadians and Tobagonians created a dog with no pedigree to avoid paying that tax. Criminality, crime, to some extent, disrespect for the law, evasion of the law have been part of our culture forever. If one is cynical, one might suggest as well that it might be well into the future. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, as a nation, why is the Honourable Member for Cuba South mumbling in my ears while I'm speaking? He is yet unable to speak with his mouth open. Mr. Deputy Speaker. There is no, he's mumbling again. So, Deputy Speaker, there is no way that as a society we can hope to solve the problem of crime unless we understand its implications and the way it has been transformed. I can remember not too long ago where murder was something that you looked at the papers and you could follow a serial, and people were intrigued because it was an unusual thing. I can remember a time when crime was something that a man would climb into your house and steal something when you were not there. Those days have gone. Today, crime in Trinidad and Tobago is an industry. It is organized. No more criminal than that statement, that vacuous statement you've just made, member for Cuba. Crime is organized. Crime is sophisticated. Oh, sorry. They're interchangeable, sorry.
Don't let him distract you.
Crime is sophisticated. Crime is an industry. Crime is interwoven. We have been discussing why we've opted to change the term drugs or dealing with the drug trade into serious crime. It's because the drug trade no longer exists as a singular entity. Where drugs are concerned, you also have human trafficking, you also have guns, and they aid and abet each other. The idea of a drug trade being a singular crime no longer exists because crime is now interwoven, crime is now interconnected, and it's affecting all of us. It's affecting urban centers, it's affecting rural centers, it's affecting the rich, it's affecting the poor. What are we to do? Are we to stand and quibble about semantics, encroach creeping dictatorships? Or are we as a government given a mandate to act, to make the kinds of changes to empower those who are tasked with enforcing the law to ensure that we can get a grip and over time reduce the scourge of crime facing us? So, Deputy Speaker, I contend that no responsible government, no reasonable government, given the circumstances that are being faced in Trinidad and Tobago today, can stand idly by, twiddle its thumbs, and do nothing. The greatest threat to our nation today is not the ISIS of the imagination of the member for Naparima. The greatest threat to our nation today is a crime scourge that is unlike anything we've ever seen. And unusual circumstances demand unusual prescriptions. And this is not even unusual. This is simply a case of a government tasked with a difficult responsibility, making the kind of choice it must make to ensure the safety of its citizens. So I could go back and forth and banter with those on the other side, or we could sit and face the seriousness of what is before us. If a government in this situation, either side, facing the problems we face, and you stand and do nothing, you can be engulfed by a tide that is already poised to sweep us away. We cannot allow that. So I stand here proud today, giving my 2 cents on behalf of my constituency, which is facing its own minor but significant crime wave, but also for the people of this nation who are wary of the crime that affects them on every day. I am proud to stand in support of the amendment to this act because those who are tasked with dealing with serious crime cannot do so with one hand tied behind their backs. They need information, they need intelligence. And if this act will provide them the kind of intelligence they need to ensure that that creeping tide of crime is halted and then reversed, all responsible members of this House should be chomping at the bit to lend it their support, verbal or otherwise. I grew up in a rural community where my father had a small cocoa plantation, so I am accustomed to seeing him dance in the cocoa. And as a metaphor, I could leave with those honorable members next on the other side, that those who have cocoa in the sun are most afraid of rain. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize the member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The member for Moruga Tableland ended on the same note that many of his colleagues on the other side used at some point in their presentation, which is that if you don't support this bill, it's because you have something to hide. If you don't support this bill, it's because you're afraid the police. If you don't support this bill, it's because you do something and you're going to get catch. I want to tell you that it is not the police we afraid. We afraid the government. The world in which we live is a world from which we are not divorced. Would you let me speak, Minister Hines? The world in which we live, it cannot be divorced from our reality, and we cannot be divorced from the reality in the world. And most of us, most of our citizens, have heard the revelations of a man called Edward Snowden. And the revelations of Edward Snowden, these revelations have shown that massive surveillance of ordinary citizens on an unprecedented scale by law enforcement and national security agencies has become commonplace and a way of life in the countries that are most highly regarded as being countries that practice democracy. So this is something, the issue of the kind of world we live in and the surveillance states that are emerging is something that we need to take seriously. And if you bring a bill here that seeks to expand the powers of an agency and seeks to expand the jurisdiction of an agency, that addresses the issue of legislation, that addresses the issue of the approval and jurisdictional processes, that addresses the issue of how much power people have and where they have it and what they can do with it. If it raises questions like how is the innocent to be protected and how do they have recourse to justice, if they raise the question of where are the checks and balances to ensure accountability and to protect and safeguard the citizen, then you have to take the legislation seriously and take the issues that we raise on this side seriously. We are not here to pick a quarrel with you, and we are not here to do anything that would not advance this country in terms of managing crime in the country. But we cannot surrender power and control to an SSA over an extended jurisdiction with the only check and balance the Minister of National Security, and then swallow that and say we are going to support you. President Obama, after the excesses that happened in the United States, where a number of ordinary citizens were found to be spied upon based on the Snowden revelations, and then subsequently the revelations about leaders of other countries being spied upon, made a statement around January 2014 in which he said, look, we've got to address this issue, and we've got to address the issue of the privacy of the citizen, the human rights of the citizen. And we cannot have agencies that have this kind of power and jurisdiction and no accountability. And the Congress of the United States took him at his word, and they began the process by which they are looking at safeguards that would harness these agencies and limit the extent and the methodology that they would use in order to get information and to secure intelligence. This is a very important thing. It's a worldwide phenomenon. And I want to say that Trinidad and Tobago is not a banana republic. Trinidad and Tobago is a serious sovereign state that has been by and large well governed. Every government has had their ups and downs, but it has been well governed, and we are certainly not going to facilitate the creation of a banana republic in Trinidad and Tobago. So when I read this bill, which is really a series of amendments to amend the Strategic Services Act and to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency, having raised those issues and the context in which we are globally, and having been in a situation in Trinidad and Tobago where we know that citizens' rights have been violated, and yet at the same time we know that there have been challenges to national security. The 1990 issue has been mentioned, for instance. It is important, therefore, to see how this bill relates to the Constitution of the country. And the reason I raised the Constitution of the country, and I know that many members opposite indicated, including the Attorney General who presented this bill, said that there is no need to look at constitutional violations in this. It does not arise. And he said that for this reason, we do not need more than a simple majority. But I want to say that the Constitution is a serious document.
Absolutely.
And I want to say that one of the things that the Constitution talks about is free men and free institutions. This Constitution says at the very inception, it talks about the position, it talks about fundamental human rights and freedoms, the position of the family in a society of free men and free institutions, the dignity of the human person, and the equal and inalienable rights with which all members of the human family are endowed by their Creator. And one of the members on our side, the member for Naparima, talked about the making of the Constitution. This is our Republican Constitution of 1976, and he spoke of the 1962 Constitution, which was actually made at Marlborough House. And this Constitution also talks about enshrined rights, and it talks about those enshrined rights in the context of arbitrary detention and exile. So the enshrined rights that it talks about are things like freedom of movement, freedom of conscience and religious belief and observance, freedom of thought and expression, freedom of association and assembly, and freedom of the press. There are other things that it mentions, of course, the right of individual to equality before the law, the right of the individual to respect for his private and family life, the right of the individual to equality of treatment from any public authority in the exercise of any functions, the right to join political parties and to express political views, etc. Now, why do I raise these things? I raise these things because these rights that are enshrined here are at risk if we do not manage the checks and balances associated with the institution that we are trying to create. Because there is nothing that prevents, under the current law that is being proposed, the amendments, that prevents interference in the life of someone who has a certain religious belief. There is nothing that prevents interference in the life of someone who has a certain position on some issue in the country at the level of ideas that you might not like and that you may not feel appropriate. And there is nothing that prevents interference if you belong to a political party or you express political views that are regarded as not palatable to the persons who are in charge of these institutions. You want me to give way? Sure.
Just for my benefit, would the member be willing to demonstrate what in these measures brings about a new condition in the matters you have just raised?
Of course.
What?
Of course. You know that I will not come here and say something just because it sounds nice. If I say something, I will show you. I will show you, but in my time, not yours.
I'm waiting.
Now, I looked up the Constitution, I looked up the meaning of a Constitution, and I won't dwell too much on it, but if I could just quote one explanation of what a constitution is from the Oxford British and World English Dictionary. It's a body of fundamental principles or established precedents according to which a state or other organization is acknowledged to be governed. So we must take this constitution seriously. Now, when I look up the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago and I see on our website, trinicenter.com, it says that the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago is the supreme and highest law of the land. And it says that the Constitution guarantees rights and freedom. It says that, Constitution says that Parliament may not authorize or effect arbitrary detention, imprisonment, or exile of any person. And then I went to the Ministry of the Attorney General. There's a section there called the Law and You. And that section talks about human rights and how they are protected in Trinidad and Tobago. And it says that you cannot deprive a person charged with a criminal offense of the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty according to law. And then I read this bill. This bill, when you look at the sweeping powers that it wishes to give without any checks in the process, the bill is really hostile to the constitutional freedoms that I just espoused. This bill can facilitate arbitrariness, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And this morning, I went to an occasion at the University of the West Indies, and when I was coming out, I bought a newspaper.
You mean the place you hijacked for some years?
And when I won't take you on, but suffice it to say that the University of the West Indies never flourished as it flourished under my time. Now, having said that, when I came out, I saw the newspapers, and I didn't get a Guardian because it wasn't available.
Honorable members, I would like to hear the discourse of the honorable member for Caroni Central, and please address the chair. Proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I will, in fact, address you. So I didn't get the Guardian because it wasn't available there, but I did get the Express and the Newsday. And when I turn to the Express as I'm going through, I get to page 4 and I read these two really disturbing articles. Axe SSA directors threaten suit. Al-Rawi, no cabinet directive to fire based on race. And in the front, when I look, it says, weed out Indians, fired SSA directors threaten lawsuit. And I could hardly believe what I was reading. I pulled my car aside to read the two stories because I could not believe what I was reading, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And then I looked at the Newsday and I found that there was another story where it says on page 10, too many Indians in the agency. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, anybody who knows me knows that I don't play around with issues related to race and divisiveness and so on in my society. All right? I do not encourage it. I do not provoke it. I do not facilitate it. I am never part of it. I am not part of that. But I want to say that if there's a story like this in which the protocol that they have sent basically to warn of the intention to go to court, which would have to be sworn by affidavits. If people, the issue is not the lawyer, do not obfuscate. I am reading an article.
Standing order. 44-6. 44-6. Sorry, 48-6. Abuse of the Queen's English.
Proceed, member, proceed.
Yes, we are basically talking about a situation that is reported in the press, and I am not making a big thing of it. The point, the source is the Express, the source is the Newsday. But having read, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I now ask for your protection, it raises the question of the arbitrariness that I just mentioned. And we have not yet passed the bill. It does not exist. People are named in it. And we have this situation in the country, and it may not have been as it is there having to do with race. Suppose it was with something else. Suppose it had to do with political affiliation. Suppose it had to do with religious affiliation. Suppose it has to do with ideological orientation. These are important things that one cannot ignore in dealing with a piece of legislation of this kind. Now, this bill creates an institution which is likely to assume guilt and leave the proof of innocence to the affected person, I want to say. So, in my view, the bill is reckless to the requirements of governance and disrespectful of citizens' rights. And based on what I read from the Constitution, which is written in the Constitution, it is in violation of constitutional protection of these rights. This bill has absolutely no countervailing checks and balances. It has no counterbalance to nor redress against excessive powers that it grants to the executive branch of government and the SSA, the Strategic Services Agency, as an institution. I cannot believe that a bill of this nature was presented to this House by the current Attorney General. I thought it was the Minister of National Security. But when I looked, it was him who presented it. I was absent when he presented it, but I got a copy of his presentation. And the reason I say that is because in the opposition, he articulated so many issues on behalf of human rights and freedoms and so on. Now, the first thing this bill does is expand the remit of the parent bill by replacing a specific mandate, that is detection and prevention of illicit traffic in narcotic drugs, psychotropic substances, and precursor chemicals, to a broader, ill-defined, in my view, category of serious crimes, which includes any crime which can result in a 5-year sentence. Now, that makes it very broad. It covers a lot of ground, and it makes the situation even more tenuous in the context of what I'm saying. So, when I think of the member for San Fernando West, now Attorney General, when he was in the opposition, advocating on behalf of people's rights, and here now bringing this bill before this House and advocating his position, which I have his presentation, so I will raise some of the issues that it is. I find it incongruous that it comes from the same person. And therefore, I want to examine some of the issues in this bill, because the bill talks about this agency dealing with homicide. And when the member for Oropouche East when the member for Oropouche East was talking, and he talked about the fact that this institution is being created to do police work. And I ask you, if you have a situation like homicide falling under the jurisdiction, well, if I say homicide, that is how I say it, man. That is my pronunciation. All right? If we have a situation like homicide, is that not police work? Is that not police work? What about kidnapping? Isn't that police work? What about gangs? That is not police work, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Why are you giving powers to the SSA to do police work? So let us take a look at the amendment. They will say that that is not true, but I will look at the amendment. You're losing it. Yeah, sure, losing it. I'm not going to lose this, though, because if all you're passing this bill, all you're passing it by all yourself. Because either you send it to the Joint Select Committee, let us do a good bill with checks and balances, or you pass it by all yourself. Because I'm not supporting this bill.
None of us supporting it.
So, I want to say that, look at this thing. It says it replaces drug trafficking with serious crime. But let us look at how this issue is. It says, this I'm reading now out of the explanatory note, or explanatory note. I suppose they'll tell me I didn't pronounce that right. So the, basically it says, would be empowered and charged with the responsibility to deal with matters relating to the prevention of serious crime. Now it says responsibilities, all right, but it does not address the issue of authority. And the reason I raise this is because a lot of the things in this bill are quite nebulous and uncertain and open, therefore, to arbitrariness, as I said. And in situations like that, the strong man always emerges. And I want to say the culture of the strong man is very, very present in West Indian society. And therefore, I want, in this particular thing, responsibility relating to the prevention of serious crime, including aspects relating to the detection and prevention. You see, it doesn't say how it is going to play the role in relation to detection and prevention. We hear the old talk here about intelligence gathering, and we hear the old talk here about surveillance. But when you come down to brass tacks, it does not say clearly how it is going to deal with this responsibility for detection and prevention. It talks about coordination of crime prevention operations. It doesn't say how. It doesn't say how it's going to do this. What we hear is the loose talk that you have these institutions in silos and you need something to bring it together. It does not say how. It says the development of strategic intelligence. Well, what does strategic mean? Does that mean the identification of specific persons for surveillance, and how is that going to be determined? These are very important. I know what strategic means. That's why I'm asking you the question. So, did somebody say, if I know what intelligence means? Don't insult my intelligence, okay? Okay? I try to be very humble with what are my assets, and I try to be very straightforward with the citizens of this country so I can deal with citizens at the level of their existence. But don't come there with me. Don't try that with me. All right? But I have some of the quotations from you, Mr. Representative for Port of Spain, North Centre, so we will get there. Then it says policy formulation and advice. Okay? Now that, again, it doesn't say how. Deepening of domestic and international cooperation. So this institution is now doing that. Information sharing, negotiating foreign technical assistance, capacity building through specialized training. Now that is a very important thing, which is that how does this agency does that? Does the agency do the picking and choosing in the police service and in the military, or is this done through some other process that is not defined, or is there going to be a protocol? I know what I'm asking. Member for Laventille West. And the people, I am not rambling, I am dealing with the issues that are dangerous in this bill. You feel I am the people that you are accustomed fooling. Let me tell you something. You can only fool some of the people some of the time. No, I'm not giving way. I'm not giving way. All right, but Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I am saying is that when I outline all of these things and see the nebulousness of it, what I am really saying is that the lines between advisory role, intelligence gathering role, and the operations role, and the operations role, those three lines are blurred. Policy, intelligence, operations, they are blurred. And you cannot have an agency like this that is capable of doing all three functions without checks and balances. They raised the issue of the clause 5 of the bill. It talks about no problem of sources. It deals with the issue of funds. I don't have any problem with the sources of funds that are articulated here. But I do have a question of accountability. That is to say, there must be some measure to indicate to us how the funds have been spent. It is one thing to say how the funds are gotten. It is important to identify how the funds have actually been spent. And by that, I do not mean simply to account and to give the notion, but what, since this is going to be an intelligence gathering agency that has implications for surveillance and therefore has implications subsequently for operations, it is important to know how the money is spent. Is it spent on wiretapping? Is it spent on tapping? Whatever it is important to know that. The details of that are important. And this issue of the penalty for crimes carrying a penalty of not less than 5 years. I think it is something that you can't just say that, send a first-year law student to find out what that is. It really raises the question. Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, giving way. I sincerely appreciate it. Okay. A gentleman you are and continue to be. May I please just encourage, I do want to hear the debates, but I'm hearing the same points over and over again. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but we have, not to curtail you in any way, but please, if we could just, if members have made the point, I've heard the point a few times, I'd be very pleased to hear. Some of the points you've raised are very novel, I thank you for them, but I don't want to invoke any standing orders, and I would like to exercise the courtesy as you always do with me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Attorney General. But I thought that any points that I may have been repeating that other people have been made, I am repeating them in the context that I have said, which is one, the constitutionality issue. Secondly, the opportunity for arbitrariness that I mentioned. Thirdly, the transparency issue, not just the accounting issue, and that's why I'm raising these issues.
Honorable member.
Now,
Honorable member, your speaking time has expired.
Yes.
You care to avail yourself of the additional 15? Proceed.
I would like to proceed. Thank you very much. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's been a lot of injury time here, I want to say.
Yes.
Okay. At the risk of repeating what others have said, this thing about persons involved in serious crime, the word involved there is very imprecise and very subject to all kinds of considerations, and that really needs to be cleaned up. And for instance, current or projected drug trafficking transactions, and substituting the word transactions related to serious crimes, how do you determine the link? Those are issues that have been raised before. So I'm saying in the text of the bill itself, in the amendments, there is some tidying up that needs to be done, because it doesn't do justice to a bill that is of this import. Okay? Now, what is the purpose of this bill really? The first thing is that what is the problem that we are dealing with, trying to solve it? It can't be the problem of just getting all these silos together to function and getting a SSA that would have all the intelligence that you need so it could solve all the crimes. When you look at the one of these reports that I have here, that there was another one that came out today that basically said that things were pretty bad and out of hand. But in this particular report, said violent crime remains a major concern. The majority of violent crimes, homicides, kidnappings, assaults, sexual assaults, are gang-related or domestic. A significant and growing portion of this violence is attributed to the influence of gangs, illegal narcotics, firearms. Not all crimes are recorded. Most reported crimes occur within the metropolitan areas, etc. And it goes on to analyze the situation. The Barbados Attorney General talked about Trinidad and Tobago, and he said he doesn't want Barbados to get like that. And then they had an editorial in the Barbados Nation basically saying, keep an eye on Trinidad and Tobago because that is not where we want to get to, and so on. But having said all of these things, I want to go back to the Minister of National Security on September 10, 2015. My number one priority is to do a review of the security architecture of Trinidad and Tobago, to look at the people, system, and procedures to ensure that they are still relevant to the threat environment to Trinidad and Tobago. He noted that the controversial special anti-crime unit will be looked at and may return. Okay? Then the PM says, this is on March the 1st, Tuesday. It says, he says the level of violent crime and criminal conduct is objectionable and continues to attract the full attention of the Cabinet, National Security Council, and all other arms of the state, whose duty it is to work assiduously to ensure that we return in the shortest possible time to good order, peace, safety, security in Trinidad and Tobago. And in CARICOM, of course, they are involved in part of a CARICOM security strategy in which the big issues are countering transnational organized crime, illicit trafficking, and terrorism, countering corruption and money laundering, preventing crime and reforming criminal justice, drug use prevention and treatment of HIV, AIDS, etc. And the end result of all of this is that you ask yourself, is this piece of legislation, if we pass it, going to deal with the crime situation? 142 today. I just saw one on Facebook, somebody wrapped up in a piece of plastic or something in Manzanilla. Really frightening. And together with that, I get the terrible news that we have again been downgraded by Moody's. And when you look at Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, you really, really worry about the state of the country. It is a problematic situation. And these things, the situation in the economy, as I said to one of the reporters not too long ago, when you're dealing with an economy, you can't deal with accounting. You must do accounting, but it is political economy that you're dealing with. And when you're dealing with crime, you cannot just deal with something like the SSA to deal with the crime on the street, 142 murders now in Trinidad and Tobago in the few months that we have gone in this year. And this is not going to solve the problem. And I want to say that this issue of the balance between privacy issues and the authority that you give and the institutions that you create is very important. You have to strike that balance, or else we're going to have nothing in the country. We'll have no democracy, we'll have no society. All we'll have is a police state. And a police state is not created by the police, I want to say. A police state is created by the kind of government that you have. Yes, sir. And they create the conditions in which you have a situation in which the arbitrariness that was reported in the Express and the Newsday can actually take place. even without legal status. So, privacy protection is a difficult issue, but I want to deal with it a little bit. In the European Union, privacy protection is a human rights issue. And the trend in Europe, even in a context of terrorism and terrorist surveillance, is to enhance privacy protection standards even further. So you see, in a democratic state, you do not come down with the clamp of the law to terrorize an entire nation in order to deal with terrorism. You deal with that aspect, yes, but you deal with the issue of privacy, because the main job of the government is in fact to protect the citizens, not to imprison them. You see? In some countries in the world, they don't even acknowledge something called the protection of privacy. I want to say that. And that's why I read the constitutional elements before. Because in some countries, the privacy laws are not covered in this constitution. The privacy issue is not covered in the Constitution, but we are covered in the Constitution by this issue of human rights and privacy. And therefore, it is the standards by which we conduct ourselves in lawmaking has to be as high as the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union when it comes down to this kind of thing. And we are no more threatened than they are threatened. In some countries in the world, they don't even acknowledge something called the protection of privacy. Who cares about privacy in China, with all due respect to them? What safeguards for privacy protection exist in Russia? Do you think that the Mugabe regime in Zimbabwe has any concerns whatsoever about privacy of citizens or privacy protection? Even in countries considered enlightened in this matter, such as the United States, such as Australia, they have challenges maintaining a balance between privacy protection and the need to gather intelligence. I mentioned the Snowden issue. I mentioned President Obama's speech. I mentioned the role of the Congress in all of this. Now, they have a problem, a challenge with the maintaining of a balance between privacy protection and the need to gather intelligence and manage surveillance. As the terrorism threat becomes more intense, the challenge to balance these concerns will be even greater. The difference is that these countries have strong traditions of democracy, and they are committed to the protection of democracy. They do research, and they have research institutions. They make findings available to the public. They have a press that leans more towards individual liberty than it does to any kind of authoritarian entity within the society. And they have NGOs and advocacy groups that are dedicated to civil liberties. The world has changed dramatically since 2011, and the terrorist attack on New York, which traumatized not just the US, but the whole world. The need for intelligence gathering and surveillance has emerged as a dominant concern. But counter-terrorism initiatives have been on the global agenda since 2001. So it's not something today. This law, the first one that dealt with drugs and so on, was done based on relationships with the United Nations and their insistence in the 1990s. I think it was 1993, I'm not sure. But it was done around that time, you know. But the intelligence agencies and the law enforcement bodies have been leveraging the issue of national security to develop systems of mass surveillance that deeply intrude in the lives and freedoms of ordinary citizens. The point I'm making here is that if this could be excessively done in the United States, if it could be excessively done in Europe, if it could be excessively done in Australia, what is to prevent us from also being excessive if we have these institutions? So you can't tell us you're going to be good guys and you won't break the law and you won't abuse the law and so on. We might believe you, but we cannot go along with you. We cannot go along with you on that, because we don't know who is going to be the governor of this state 50 years or 100 years from now. And therefore the laws have to protect the citizens for a long time. This has become an issue of great contention, this business of privacy and so on, and how you protect it. We are in countries in which the public discourse is strong, and across the world among individuals and institutions to whom the balance between individual privacy and liberty on the one hand and the need to be prepared to protect a community, a country, or a world system from imminent danger through intelligence gathering and surveillance is a real and urgent necessity. I am not saying that this bill does not address some of the issues that we must address. We've had a 1970 here, we've had a 1990 here. We have all citizens involved in terrorist activity abroad. We have people who have been imprisoned in other countries coming back to Trinidad and Tobago, not knowing where that is going to end up. This is very real. But the way the legislation is framed and the way it is not contained makes it a dangerous little piece of legislation. Now, real questions emerge in this sphere. Should we, you know, in this thing you could...
Remember, you have 2 more minutes, please.
Okay. I will have to close, Mr. Speaker, in the 2 minutes. And what I would say is this. I have before me the statement of the Attorney General. And I am not in a situation where I can go through the entire thing. But I do want to emphasize some of the issues that he raised. What did I do with it now? No. And the reason I raised it, I can't find it now, but he raised the issue of legitimacy. He raised the issue of the properness of this legislation. He raised the issue of proportionality in the legislation. He raised all the issues that are important to raise in relation to the legislation. But what he did not raise, he raised the issue of legitimate aim, proportionality, the issue of executive power. He mentioned the Attorney General, the purpose. He said the purpose is intelligence only, and I pointed out that the nebulousness of this legislation makes it hard to say that it is for intelligence only. He dealt with the issue of judicial warrant and when you would not use warrant. But what I would say is the ability to use, to interfere with people without warrant is excessively expanded in this legislation. You can do it almost for anybody, and you now have more people who can do it in the system, in the SSA, and you have other people who have been given that power under the old legislation already. Now, I want to close by saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I have no problem with the legislation in intent. We on this side do not have any problem with dealing with the issue of crime in this country and dealing with it well. We have no problem with creating a good intelligence gathering agency which can make a difference to crime. But if we're going to do that, we need to have the checks and balances that are necessary, and we need to have clean language in the legislation that are in which the language is precise. And finally, we've got to have a legislation that can make people more rather than less secure.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for Tabaquite.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Let me take the opportunity to congratulate my colleagues on this side for their contributions that they've been making to this very important, but what could be very dangerous, a dangerous piece of legislation in the country in terms of what my colleague Dr. Tewarie, the member for Caroni Central, mentioned in terms of the rights, protecting the rights and freedoms of people. So, Deputy Speaker, allow me a moment to just mention something I think it's important about my colleague, Dr. Tewarie. During his presentation in the crosstalk, unsavory comments were attempted about his tenure as the principal of the university, and it happened on the floor here. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my view, Dr. Tewarie advanced the University of the West Indies, and particularly the internationalization of the relationships of the university and the building of what today is one of the best business schools, not only in the Caribbean, but internationally, the Lockjack School of Business. Having said that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me also pick up on a point made by the member for Laventille West, when he tried to insinuate that we are not patriotic, that we will not be patriotic or acting with patriotism if we were, if we didn't support this bill, we would not be patriots. And I think the member for Naparima also spoke about this. You know, to be patriotic is to love your country. But to be patriotic also is to stand in defense against dictatorship. And any time that any group of persons, whether it was in the coup of 1990, or whether it is in the attempts of this government to undermine the fundamental rights and freedoms of people, like is enshrined in some of this legislation, has been attempted, then standing against that is also being patriotic, because you're being patriotic to the values of the country of freedom and democracy. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister, speaking to the convention of the PNM, he made a very interesting statement speaking at that convention, where he said, this was the last convention of the PNM, he said, "We invite the opposition to join us in this battle against the criminals." And the next few lines of his are very important. "And with or without them, we are going to go ahead and pass that law." And the article continues, making reference to the amendments to the SSA and so on. And this was at the special convention of the ruling PNM on Sunday, that will have been the 3rd of April. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when you can say that you're going to go ahead with or without them and pass legislation of this nature and ignore that them that you speak about represent over 340,000 persons in the country, then you are treading very dangerous ground. Because what you are signaling is that you do not have respect for the opposition and for those who stand against you as the opposition. And that has been a characteristic of the PNM. Who don't like it, get the hell out of here. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is not what this country is about. We have come a long way from 1956 to today to turn back the clock. And what we should be doing is achieving consensus in the country. Consensus as we move forward, rather than the kind of divisiveness that is being promoted by the other side and the contempt. What we are seeing developing in this country, in the statement of the Prime Minister with respect to the treatment of the opposition, we are going to go ahead with or without them, is not different to what we are seeing in today's Newsday, where the Minister of Labour is quoted as saying that that the unions, they did not consult with the unions because time did not permit that, and then apologizes. We are really sorry about the situation. It is not different to what the Trinidad Express has now begun to pick up in its editorial. On today's Imbert talking down style stirs up dissent and concludes by saying, in time, it will become clearer if Finance Minister Imbert has got his economic sums right. What is this?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise on Standing Order 48-1.
Again, Honourable Member, let's keep on the topic that's being debated today, please. The S Strategic Services Bill, please.
Sure, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but with due respect and with all respect to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm making a very important point on the tone with which this debate is being conducted and the way that the views of the opposition are being dispensed with, and the entire country that opposes the PNM is being dispensed with. And I'm arguing that a pattern is developing that we are seeing in the country of arrogance and contempt towards everything that they don't agree with. And that's the point I'm making, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think it's important because I quoted the Prime Minister and saying, when with or without us, we are going to get this law done.
Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Members, members of this Honorable House, again, I will not be tolerating the excessive crosstalk that have been happening since after tea. Okay? So I'm going to make a ruling. Which standing order you quoted, sir?
55-1, sir.
Honorable Member for Naparima, I just spoke. Overruled. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me reiterate a very important point, because I will be one of the, maybe second to last speaker. I want to make this point clear on behalf of the opposition once again, that the opposition has every intent to support legislation which will cause an abatement in criminal activity. I want that to be a fundamental. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, while we will not stand in the way of legislation which will positively impact upon the security of citizens and national security, at the same time, we are not going to allow legislation that affects in any form whatsoever, especially negatively that is, the rights, the fundamental rights and freedoms of our citizens. And I must say that. And I will repeat it because it is important. It's important for the population to realize it. Because perhaps until we had drawn this matter to the attention of the media by a media conference, even the media did not realize the extent to which this legislation would be affecting the rights and freedoms of people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are, in this Parliament, facilitators of the efforts of the security forces through legislation. We are facilitators of the courts through legislation, the justice system. And we need to pass legislation to push back what can only be described now as growing lawlessness in the country. And, you know, maybe my colleagues on the other side don't want to hear it, but the lawlessness has increased tenfold since the PNM1 elections. People are just doing what they want to do. Lawlessness is just too much. There's a total loss of respect for law, and there's a loss of respect for life as a whole. So don't think we do not understand the importance of legislation to deal with crime, but we must see the stark reality of what is facing us. And the stark reality is, for some reason, the police service and the security forces have not been able to get a hold of law and order in the country. And the Minister of National Security needs to explain to the country why. Why is it that the criminals have gained the upper hand to such an extent? We have come here today to argue there is a matter of lack of intelligence. I will address that. But, you know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the question still has to be asked. Why is the police service charged with gathering information? Why is it that even since 1990, if you were to go back so far, they have not been able to improve their intelligence gathering? Why? Is it that somebody charged with that responsibility is not doing their job in the service itself? What is wrong? And then, therefore, the Minister of National Security needs to bring in the heads of the service and ask that question. What is wrong? Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my mind, there are areas that the police service has been doing well. For example, in the removal of firearms from the streets. They have done well, and they must be congratulated. Yet, why is it more and more firearms are coming into the country almost on a daily basis? Children have no firearms in their hands. Less than 16-year-olds are found with firearms. And in the context of the debate here today, I'm therefore forced to ask, where is the intelligence in the police service that it appears not to be able to identify the gun runners, the suppliers? Yes. Why is it that people in Cedras can tell you on the street that guns are coming through Cedras? You have a Coast Guard post there. You have all kinds of posts there. And yet you want to tell me that they cannot intercept and gather from information from the people on the ground, the information that will allow them to make their arrests or make their interceptions with the gun runners that are coming across the main. And that is open information on the ground. You don't have to go and buy that information. The people of Cedras are telling you that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have some other questions. When you examine the scope of matters being brought under the aegis of this amended SSA, you are also forced to ask the question as to whether the current government has lost faith in the ability of the police service to deal with the current situation. And what they are really doing is in a very subtle manner, or a more than subtle manner, placing power elsewhere in a parallel entity over which the minister will have wide powers and authority and be protected in the exercise of those powers, given the weak oversight, which we talked about, the weak oversight, weak checks and balances, if any.
5-1, fifth time it's been said.
Specifically,
I'm on my feet.
55,
I'm on my feet. Members, again, each individual will be given the opportunity to debate. And with regards to repetition, please, according to the particular standing order, 55(1)(b), persists in irrelevant or tedious repetition either of his own arguments or the arguments used by other members. I know we are discussing the SSA, but please, members, let's try to ensure that repetition is minimized. Right? I will not, when I say, continue to give information on it again. Kindly proceed, Member for Tabaquite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm fearful. I am fearful, given the history of the PNM, that a parallel entity is being...
1-44, 10, 48, 6.
Honorable Member, Honorable Member for Attorney General, the member have just started his statement by issuing the title. So let us hear what he has to say, please. Proceed, Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker, what it is in the DNA of the PNM, that whenever they are in government, they effect or seek to effect measures which transgress the rights of citizens. You know, I don't want to go back to the dreaded Public Order Act, because that would be a good place to go back, but I wouldn't go back. Mr. Speaker, strong legislation is necessary in the fight against crime. But, are they going to say I'm repeating again? Yes. But there's a real problem when a government attempts to widen the powers, which is civil.
This is the 10th.
You're trying to shut me down?
Yeah, I'm allowed to under the
You don't want
standing
me to
orders.
speak?
I'm raising
You don't want the
standing
country to
orders.
speak? You don't want me to speak on behalf of my constituents?
For Tabaquite, on a standing order, proceed.
Yes, sir. Under the standing orders, 55(1)(b), where I make the point succinctly, this is the umpteenth speaker to raise the same point again. And the scope of the debate can't just be continuously the same point. I respectfully do not intend to interrupt the honourable members, but the points, I'm making notes, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's the same points over and over again. Much obliged.
Honorable members, I am also making my notes, but the member has started to make his point. Once it is that it has been expounded, I will be in a position in order to say whether it is that it's been repetitious or not. Kindly proceed, Honorable Member for Tabaquite.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is clear that no matter what we say on this side with respect to this bill, they're going to shut us down, they're going to pass the bill against the will of more than half of the people of this country. That's going to happen. And that is unfortunate. And I thank you, and my respect has grown for you, that you have seen at least what I'm trying to say and recognizing my freedom to express it here in the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, what I like to also say is that I believe that this, since it's going to affect the rights of citizens, and since it's expanding the range of things which can be intercepted and what have you. I think that this bill requires a constitutional majority. I think it requires that. And I think that a case can be made for that. Wherever under the Constitution people's rights are affected, therefore I want to raise it. And that's one of the reasons we are asking that this bill be carried to a joint select committee, which will be able to deal with that, or put in the checks and balances which will avoid.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 55(1)B. This is the millionth time we are hearing about checks and balances, joint select committee, and constitutionality. If they have nothing new to say, oh gosh, man, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they have nothing new to say. They are just regurgitating the same things over and over and over.
Honorable members, it's a debate dealing with a specific bill. All right? I am of the opinion that yes, there would be certain points that will have to be raised, and all I am saying is that the members on the other side will also have their points to raise. Each member will have the opportunity. Again, as the speaker in the chair, I will determine the extent of the repetition. And I am saying that the member has only begun to make his point. Once he goes into it, I'll be able to make an assertion as to the validity of being repetitious or not. Kindly proceed, member for Tabaquite.
So, Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, what are the checks and balances required? What are the checks and balances required? Let me make reference to two acts: the Data Protection Act and the Interception of Communication Act. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I really want to know, what is the problem with the Honorable Attorney General? Why is he trying to shut down the discussion?
Member, make your point, please. I do not need no assistance, members, in order to make my judgment. Proceed, make your point, and I will determine accordingly, member for Tabaquite. Make your point, please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have made my point for the evening, and the population of this country has seen the environment in which I have made my point, because now they know that laws are going to be passed in this country contrary to the will of maybe the majority of the citizens, using the simple majority that they have on that side. Mr. Speaker, I have very little to say again, but what I want to say is that it is very interesting to me that this bill that they are talking about, the SSC, and expanding it to include all of these things, flies in the face of their failure over the last 7 months to deal with the criminal situation in the country. Flies in the face. Flies in the face. You wonder what has happened to all the training of the police officers who have been sent to Cambridge University and all about for training. What has happened to all that training? Have they not been able to effect that training? We don't fire people like that. Causes us to get these kinds of headlines, very disturbing headlines on the newspaper. Claims of unfair dismissal, racist requests. We have not engaged in that kind of thing.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 55(1)B. That letter has been aired by at least 3 members opposite. Are we going to be hearing about this letter from every single speaker?
Member for Tabaquite, please, no reference to that letter and also to the newspaper articles with regards to the firing of the officers and so on, please. Kindly proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Could I just ask for your guidance? If a situation arises where you need information to bring your point forward and you need to utilize the letter as well as the information, is it not correct that you could utilize letter and information to bring your point across, although it may be the same letter and information that the previous speakers utilized, but the information you're bringing may be different?
According to the standing order, member, 55(1)B, persists in irrelevant and tedious repetition, and would be about the third time that a member would be utilizing the said letter and also reference to the newspaper article. Whether it is that he's making a similar point or a different point, but it's reference to the same documentation, and I'll prefer that he desists from it.
I just seek your guidance, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If the fact is that the letter and the information of the letter is a finite thing and has to be utilized for a different discourse, we have to utilize the finite letter for a different interpretation. So it's not the same point. The letter may be the same, but the argument is different. He said headlines and facts.
Member, I will determine as we go along. Kindly proceed. Member for Tabaquite.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this legislation has not even been passed, and the population has had a very, very good opportunity to see the attitude of our friends on the other side. With respect to how they intend to govern. Mr. Speaker,
55(1)B.
In conclusion, Mr.
Point
Speaker,
of order, please. 55(1)B continues to refer to it, and we can throw in 55(1)A as well. Objectionable, abusive, insulting, and offensive words that seem to always come from the other side, please, Deputy Speaker.
That 48.6, Mr. Speaker.
Hold on one second.
No, I'm 48-4 for this one. For member for Laventille West, 48-4.
Member for Chief Whip, please. Have a seat, please. I overrule member for Tabaquite. Kindly proceed, please, and let's get on with the debate.
yeah.
48-4 on the member for Laventille West.
With regards to
48-4.
he stood on a point of order, sir. Kindly proceed, member for Tabaquite.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've made my points, but there are 2 points I want to make in conclusion. One, I just said that the country has had a chance to see the behavior of the government on matters of important legislation like this, and they now know how they expect to be treated. Secondly, what is there to give us hope that this revised SSA will be any better? And it is not really intended to be a Gestapo-type organization. And finally, I leave it for the population's judgment as to what is the real reason for disbanding the SSA as currently constituted and reconstituting it in the frame of mind that they have determined. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member for Cumuto, Manzanilla.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I rise in this debate
Absolutely.
to really bring about a matter that is very personal to me.
Well, that is one thing. I sit down here.
Member,
Deputy
member, can you have your seat, please? Members, please. As the Deputy Speaker, I think I deserve to be respected. All right, let's continue with the debate, but please, members, we can have the little crosstalk, but please, let's ensure that we hear the individual, and again, the repetition will not be tolerated. I have made my notes, so I have jottings as to what can be considered as we proceed. Cumuto Manzanilla, I recognize you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Chair. Deputy Speaker, as I indicated earlier, you might have missed it, I have a very personal interest in this debate. In 2005, my son had been kidnapped, and as a result of it, I had been privy to a number of matters that were affecting the police service and the SSA at that time. So much so that I was moved to write some articles that were published in the Trinidad Guardian in July of the same year. And there were 3 things that would have been highlighted at that time. 1, there was an extremely high crime rate. 2, there was a very low detection rate. And 3, there was a very low prosecution rate, conviction rate. And as a result of it, there was a concern in the country because there was, at that time, very well known to the population that there was this surveillance unit that was operating in Trinidad and Tobago. Oftentimes, person would hear, not necessarily see, but hear the blimp passing overhead, and therefore we felt that a lot of criminals had time to hide or put away whatever it is. But the point about it is that there was that level of intelligence gathering at that time, and yet it was not put to use in terms of reducing crime. As a matter of fact, Deputy Speaker, it is under what we would refer to as spying. We were of the opinion, at least the population, was of the opinion that this level of spying did not bring about any reduction in crime, but rather it allowed and promoted crime. It did nothing to bring my son back. As a matter of fact, when the Honorable Attorney General made the point of that the unit, the SSA, would be responsible only for intelligence gathering, it did nothing then without working with other units. It must be in the context of solving crime. So intelligence gathering now will not impact unless you have the policies and the procedures and the connections in terms of how each unit, each agency will work with each other. And that has not been articulated as stated by members on my side, which is member for Caroni Central and for Oropouche East. So I'm not going to repeat it, but I just want to let you know, Deputy Speaker, that we can see the future by looking at what happened and transpired in the past. And one of the things that we can do is look at a trend analysis. And the trend has always been, Deputy Speaker, that crime has always flourished under the PNL. What has been very clear, and this is maybe how member for Moruga, Tableland, would understand why crime has flourished in such a short time. And so, I will not give way. And so, Deputy Speaker, it is important for us to address the concerns of the population.
Members, please. Members, please. I want to hear the contribution of the member. Proceed.
Thank you so much for your protection, Deputy Speaker. As I indicated, the persons who prosper are the criminals. And there is no assurance in this bill that it will not continue. There's no assurance. I will continue to address you, Deputy Speaker.
Members, please.
Thank you. You know, there's something about when you make a public statement, Deputy Speaker. When you make a public statement, it remains in the public domain. And so, I know that a member for La Horquetta Talparo would be able to agree with me when I say that in light of the fact with the rapid rail, he had opposed it. And so in the public domain, I had made this statement in 2005, and it was this. I began to ask myself questions such as, why does the anti-crime unit have equipment necessary for surveillance, another AKS? What is their purpose? Why do they answer only to the Minister of National Security? It is my opinion, Honorable Minister of National Security, because I was speaking to the Minister in my article, that when an entire unit answers only to you, it raises grave concerns. Now, mind you, I am not placing any attacks on your character. And still, to the Honorable Minister of National Security, current, I am not casting any aspersions on your character as well. I continue. I'm just saying that no political entity should be in charge of the defenses of a nation because there is the potential for victimization and unscrupulous means. Remember, and I continue, when you put a structure in place, it is for future administrations as well. As the unit has already been set up with mechanisms must be put in place to protect its integrity. And so, Deputy Speaker, what I said then is still very relevant and applicable now. That in its current state, there isn't anything to protect the integrity of this unit. Members on this side spoke about the Israeli system that was brought to light by the government. And member for Oropouche East spoke of those methods like methods of torture. And I recalled a constituent raising a matter on the appropriation bill that Minister of National Security spoke on, where he said, and I quote, "So what would be immediately done is the creation of a specialized joint unit designed specifically with all the necessary qualified personnel, the appropriate equipment, and the legal framework, most important, to treat with the possession of guns and activities of gangs in Trinidad and Tobago." You see, what we are sending there, Madam Speaker, is a message to those who choose to bear arms illegally in Trinidad. This specialized unit would be knocking at your door. This specialized unit would make your life in such a way that you have to give up that gun, Madam Speaker. It would be based on intelligence used, and I repeat, within a legal framework. And so those who choose to bear guns illegally in Trinidad and Tobago, this specialized unit, which would be based throughout the length of Trinidad and Tobago, would focus specifically on retrieving or dealing with those individuals who choose to bear guns in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Sorry. No, Madam Speaker, it was the end. Deputy Speaker, unquote. End of quote. And so, Deputy Speaker, when my constituents heard that, they were concerned that there would be a mongoose gang, and that was their concern. That we would have sat on this side and give our unequivocal support to this bill, not understanding that our fundamental rights might have been interfered with. And so this is the concern on our side. And we stand here representing not only my constituency, not only our constituencies, but we stand here as what we are expected to do, and that is to ensure that the government is accountable and transparent. And as such, when we speak about intelligence gathering, I want to remind the government that there are members who are on that side who were in government during that time of surveillance when the Prime Minister, Patrick Manning, made a comment that he knew Mr. Big. Didn't he say he knew Mr. Big? And yet today, we don't know who is Mr. Big, and Mr. Big has not been apprehended, prosecuted, or incarcerated. Nothing like that. And so we, on this side, are very concerned about the level and the usage of the intelligence that they seek to bring a legal framework for. Back then, in 2005, when my son was kidnapped, Deputy Speaker, there was no coordination. There was no coordination. There was not even proper assessment of what transpired. There were police officers who came, different police officers, those who were attached to the AKS, those who were attached to the anti-crime unit, various. I mean, they were, I couldn't even keep up with the amount of units they came from. But they did not work together as the other side is saying, and we agree with it. But we don't support having a unit that is brought on arbitrarily, unilaterally, and then come to the Parliament for a rubber stamp. That can't happen. There must be an engagement with the necessary stakeholders. And I want to explain, if I may be allowed to speak about best practice. And I'm not quoting from any of the other, from anyone from my side. It comes from a gentleman by the name of Jim McNeely. This was a paper done on from Homeland Security, dated December 18, 2007. It speaks about privacy best practice. It really speaks about the CCTV, but at the same time, they had to give an overview of what is necessary to protect when you're dealing with surveillance. And I quote, "What we found in practice is it's fairly easy to reach agreement on most of the legal principles. It's a lot harder to come to agreement on policy issues and to come to agreement to the very difficult area of operationalization the legal principles that we believe in. We seem to have a lot of disagreements in those areas." And so, Deputy Speaker, that's what is happening today. We have disagreement in those areas. But he continues, and this part is important. He said, "My personal belief is that the solution probably isn't in a detailed statutory regime, but in building up good practices. Good practices become habits on the part of the operators, and the habits will govern the operators in routine circumstances and in dealing with circumstances that they don't foresee at the time the systems are set up. Good habits and having a good culture of respecting that vast area of freedom and human activities, good habits can govern the operators better than a set of rules can govern them because they will do the right things. It can work better than any audit or any set of rules that we can apply from our heights." And he was speaking from their point of view. And what we don't have in this country is good practice. We don't have that ability to trust one another, Madam Speaker. We don't have that in our culture. We said on this side that we are not afraid of the police. We have not been afraid of the police. We have indicated that we are afraid of the government, and everyone is afraid of the government. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it that throughout the world, people do not trust governments. And as such, for the trust to come, for the ability for us to be able to work together, must be based on good practice. But the history has shown, as I indicated, Madam Speaker, you were not here, but I spoke about the trend. And looking back, and we can see forward where we are going based on the trend. And the trend has not indicated to us that the government of the day has not had a good relationship in terms of speaking with clarity and putting in place the things that are necessary for the benefit of the people, for the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And as a result of it, for us to go forward, because we understand we need this, don't get me wrong, Madam Speaker. We know that we need to bring crime down. We had crime down. We on this side had crime down. We understand about a low detection rate. We on this side increased the detection rate. We understand about low prosecution rate, and we recognize that. And as such, Madam Speaker, I will address you. I continue from the report I was reading, and they were saying that there were some recommendations. And the first recommendation they had spoken about was showing fiscal responsibility and policy leadership. And I said to myself, well, you know, we said on this side, Madam Speaker, during the elections that there was really no leadership, no vision. So that might have been a little problem. But I mean, there's always the case of learning. And they spoke about, in the second recommendation, that one needs to show leadership to restore the proper process. Proper planning often does not occur when there is not actually a public process, and a process where elected officials and the public and the police department and all the stakeholders involved come together and discuss thoroughly. I don't know if the other side knows what thoroughly means, but thoroughly is used what it is we are trying to accomplish, why we are trying to accomplish it, and what resources we have available to us. Most importantly, the public is allowed to discuss issues of effectiveness, issues of impact on civil liberties. Because at the end of the day, in our attempt to solve crime and in our attempt to utilize intelligence surveillance to identify those who commit crimes, should not be at the expense of our civil liberties. And I'm not going to go there, as it has been spoken about already. And I'm not going to take very long, Madam Speaker. What I'm saying today is that I am of the firm view, based on best practice, that this SSA bill should go to a joint select committee so that the necessary processes can be followed. There must be accountability. there must be transparency, and there must be in place a system where citizens can go and give their concerns if they have been unfairly targeted. Because if we don't have that, Madam Speaker, then our civil liberties would be violated in no small way. And so, I want to join with my members on this side to simply state, yes, we are about supporting the bill, but not in its current form. And we will work towards reducing crime, increasing the detection rate, and increasing the prosecution rate. And we would like to see that this country is left in a better place as a result of it. And with that, Madam Speaker, I thank you. Barataria, Salmon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to thank you for allowing me to join this debate. I will not be lengthy, but I would just like to say to the colleagues on the other side, I have been here since 1995, and I have seen Prime Ministers start off normal and become different people somewhere in between the system. I have seen it. And I've seen it happen time and time and time again. And I've been on the opposition side, and I've also been on the government side. I've been a deputy speaker, I've been a minister. And what I would like to share with the members, this legislation is good legislation. Make no bones about it. But there are arguments for it on both sides. Arguments on the side of the government and arguments on the side of the opposition. And if one looks at it in a different context, rather than being government and opposition, obstructionist and proactiveness, one will see that there are merits to the both arguments. And I just want to say that when I was a government minister, I brought a bill to this Honorable House called the Nurses and Midwives Act. I brought a bill, and the then Attorney General was in the Senate, but not in the House. And the member for Diego Martin Northeast was a previous Minister of Health, and we both sat down with the problems that I was encountering with the actual legislation and worked together. I withdrew the bill and came back through the Senate and fixed the bill. And today we have a very good Nurses and Midwives bill. But the Nursing Intern Program, which is something that is unique to Trinidad and Tobago. Sometimes, members, and to you, Madam Speaker, when you are on the government side, it's akin to walking in a jungle with a flashlight. You have the flashlight, and the flashlight is pointing at where you want to go. So you see the tree, the base of the tree in the night. But what you don't see are the side angles, as in the darkness. And that is what we're speaking about here today. We are speaking about the sides of what is not being seen, because your direction to solve crime, because it's gone into a horrible state in this country, I wouldn't say it's your fault. I think it's a fault of what has been ongoing over the last couple of years. And it has not reached what they call critical mass. And I've seen the United States advisory say it's reached a critical point, and that's where it's at. This has been going on for years. So what I'm saying, we are here to help. I would like to see this bill, this amendment, together with the SSA bill and the interception of communications, be given enough teeth, not only to work on criminals, but to also work on rogue elements. There are a lot of rogue elements in the protective services. This bill, if done correctly, will make sure that both sides, government and opposition, come together to determine exactly a proper bill that will deal with the holistic part of it. I understand what the Attorney General is doing. He needs to pass this legislation because it will eavesdrop. It will eavesdrop on the criminal element. But I will tell you something. A lot of the criminal element, they are steps ahead of us. Once I was walking through my constituency and I overheard a lady saying that she was given a cell phone by the bad boys on the hill. And all she was given is $100 or so per week for phone cards. And once they say a police squad car comes on, they would call to tell the bad boys or the drug dealers there's a police car in the area. So that is something we have to fight against. So things such as that, I would say that targeting serious crimes is very important. But how do we do it? What do we do, and how is the mechanism? We've heard about checks and balances through tedious repetition, as the member for San Bernardo West said. Yes, it was done as repetition. But with repetition in Parliament, it's important because if it only said once, nobody hears it. And marketing techniques will tell you, for something to be understood and something to stick, you must say it 3 times or as much as 6 times. So that is what is being done. So one could understand that the method of approach is good on both sides, and I would suggest to the Attorney General that you take it into consideration as we did in the past, and let us send this to a joint select committee and come up with a bill that will be beneficial as a whole to fight crime in this country. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Princess Town.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to be able to join to contribute in this Strategic Services Amendment Bill brought to the Parliament today. Madam Speaker, we have heard from many different speakers, both on the government and opposition side, put forward their arguments. And the government has made the point about tedious repetition. And I would like to take the debate in a slightly different way, in that I would like to use it as the opportunity to summarize some of the points the opposition has made, but also to introduce 2 or 3 new points into the debate. Madam Speaker, I would like to go into the meat of the matter with respect to what is the opposition's issues with respect to the bill itself, and outline what are our main concerns, what we would like to see addressed in particular, and also some other grey areas that continue to remain in the public domain that we believe that should be answered by the government. The first being, Madam Speaker, one of our main concerns with the bill is the National Security Minister, his ability to instruct the director of the SSA whether or not to intercept a particular person's emails.
I want to remind you, and you've said it, Standing Order 55(1)B. The point about the Minister of National Security being able to instruct the SSA director has been beaten in the last 2 sessions and in this. I have tolerated some of it because, for maybe continuity,
sure,
I'm going to strictly enforce Standing Order 55(1)B. So maybe you'd like to start at your 3 new areas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when I started, I indicated I just wanted to summarize for the Attorney General's purposes with respect to what were our particular areas that we were concerned about. Having ruled on that matter, I will go into the new areas of discussion. Madam Speaker, we in the opposition are very concerned about the appointment of the head of the SSA with respect to the person that has been appointed to head the SSA, and that is one, Colonel Robinson. Madam Speaker, I would like to speak to some of the issues that we are concerned about with respect to this particular appointment. Madam Speaker, in 2004, Colonel Robinson was attached to the Army. And at that point, Madam Speaker, when he was attached to the Army in 2004, he was sent on training in Kansas. And this training, Madam Speaker, this training was to the tune of several hundred thousands of Trinidad and Tobago dollars for training in the area of engineering and combat engineering. Madam Speaker, in 2004, Colonel Robinson left the Army. It is alleged that Colonel Robinson was sent on an expensive course by the Army to Kansas when he was a lieutenant colonel. He would therefore have returned to serve his time in the Army in return, just like any scholarship recipients. While on the course, however, it is alleged that he sent an application for employment in Petrotrin. Madam Speaker, I am advised that the chairman of Petrotrin at that time was one Malcolm Jones of World GTL fame. Madam Speaker, when Robinson returned after completing the course, he was promoted and then he subsequently resigned from the army to take up the post at Petrotrin. Madam Speaker, what is interesting to note that when Colonel Robinson left the army without paying his dues to the state for the training, etc., the Chief of Defense at that time was none other than the member for Dabadi O'Meara. Further, the commanding officer at that time of the regiment was none other than the member for Point Fortin. Madam Speaker, I am further advised that Colonel Robinson had no follow-up action from the Army through the CDS and the commanding officer with respect to serving out his time in the service of Trinidad and Tobago in the Army. His transfer to Petrotrin was seamless. Madam Speaker, the information left in my postbox indicates that Colonel Robinson has no experience in intelligence gathering since he spent his career in primarily engineering, and he is qualified as a combat engineer.
Again, I am going to rule on studious repetition. The issue with respect to the particular office holder at this stage and his qualifications have already been exposed in this debate. It might have been on the second or the first occasion, but this has already been dealt with. So you can proceed on another point.
Not to interrupt my friend's flow, if I may, and thank you, Honourable Member, for giving way. Could the Honourable Member just indicate, in relation to those very serious allegations just made, what the source of that information is? Because I accept that under the standing rules and privileges, that he not only has the right to say it, but he has the right to own it. So I'd very much like to understand where this information comes from, so that someone who's not in this House would have the opportunity to have it addressed if necessary.
Purely to say your source, because it's on the record.
Madam Speaker, I used the word alleged because of the fact that this information was left in my post box, but I'm sure
Then on a point of privilege, Madam Speaker, recognizing privileges under Section 55 of the Constitution, the member must hold a genuine belief in the allegations being made in this House under the privileges of this Parliament, under the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, under May's standing orders. And therefore I am now extremely concerned that the member is not saying, as he's required to say, that he believes the information that has been given to him, because privileges like this, the right under 55(1) cannot be abused at all, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member, are you prepared to accept your belief in this statement?
Madam Speaker, I said it in the context that I was leading up to ask a question whether or not these things were true from members.
So therefore, I can ask you now to withdraw the statement.
Sure. Madam Speaker, I will move on to the other issue.
Excuse me.
Sorry. I said
Member,
withdrawn, yes, sorry.
Have you withdrawn?
Yes, Madam Speaker, withdrawn.
Thank you very much.
Madam Speaker, the Honourable Attorney General, through crosstalk, had indicated that he wanted us to go through and specify the detection rate with respect to serious crimes during the lead up to the 2010 general election. And Madam Speaker, I will list for you from 2007 the detection rate for serious crime. In 2007, the detection rate was 23. In 2008, it was 17. In 2009, it was 17. In 2010, prior to May 2010, it was 16. Madam Speaker, this information was provided by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Madam Speaker, there's one area that I would like to touch with before I take my seat, and that is an area that the member for Horquetta, Talparo, recently raised in the public domain. And Madam Speaker, I found it to be rather peculiar that he chose to raise this particular issue at this particular time. Madam Speaker, I would like to deal with the issue of social media privacy and public networks. Madam Speaker, social media, texting, WhatsApp, emails, etc. is a new medium of communication over the past few years. Wi-Fi has become the greatest craze not only among the younger demographics, but among everyone. Madam Speaker, the SSA amendments will give persons the ability to hack into photos, private messages, videos, WhatsApp chats. It will be a case of where persons' private lives will no longer be private. Madam Speaker, recently, I believe it was this week, the member for La Horquetta, Talparo, spoke about the government's initiative to provide free Wi-Fi and broadband throughout the country. And Madam Speaker, I thought it was particularly interesting that the government has chosen to embark on this particular program at this particular time, especially at a time when they're telling us there's no money, as the member for Arima has indicated, that there is no money at this time to deal with the Arima Hospital. There's no money at this time to deal with the Point 14 Hospital. But Madam Speaker, they have indicated that they are going ahead with the initiative for free Wi-Fi and broadband in public spaces. Madam Speaker, the timing, as I said, of the pronouncement is very strange.
Will you give it?
No. In an article published on Forbes.com on April 3, 2014, it says, it takes zero hacking skills to surreptitiously monitor and or hijack communications over a public Wi-Fi network. It is widely available. Freeware makes eavesdropping on email and web browsing as simple as pressing a button. Madam Speaker, David Kennedy, founder of information security firm, indicated, and I quote, a hacker can monitor the network traffic of an entire community with an iPad-sized device hidden away in his backpack. The issue isn't just that the networks are so easy to attack. With little public awareness that the threat even exists, users routinely expose valuable personal data over Wi-Fi hotspots, making the networks an even more attractive target.
What is that source?
David Kennedy from the Johns Hopkins Technology Center. It was published on April 3, 2014. He further went on to say, Madam Speaker, security experts point to a number of options that hackers can use to gain access to personal information. But they all stem from the fact that the public network is, well, public. The fact that anyone can join the network is what makes it so unsafe, cautions Matthew Green, an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins Information Security Institute. A password login to join the network might feel reassuring, he adds, but if everybody knows the password, that is no better than not having one at all. A hacker's first task is simply getting on the same network that you're using, whether the network password is doled out by the barrister at the counter or printed. Madam Speaker, we are particularly concerned at this time as to whether or not these public hotspots, these networks, could be used for illegal tapping and access to one's personal information. Madam Speaker, those were some of the other areas that I wanted to go into my short contribution. Madam Speaker, one colleague said to me earlier, he said that those that are on the other side are saying, well, the only people who have anything to worry about are those who probably have cocoa in the sun. Madam Speaker, I want to caution my friends across the aisle in that all intents and purposes of this bill may not be for those on this side, but rather for those that are sitting across there. We spoke about rumors and gossip and so on, and the member for Siparia, the member for Urupuch East, spoke about the amalgamation of the old guard. And we are particularly concerned about the amalgamation of the old guard, because you are hearing about meetings of former ministers with sitting MPs on the other side, and that's why we are particularly concerned whether or not this bill is really intended for those sitting down opposite. But Madam Speaker, those that want to beat their chests loudly and talk about cocoa in the sun and jail and so on. You know, my grandmother always has a saying. She tells me, when dog are accustomed sucking egg, they keep going back to suck more. And whether or not that dog is a Pompek, a pit bull, or a Rottweiler. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for La Horquetta, Talparo.
Madam Speaker, I had not intended to enter this debate, but I've been goaded by the member for Princess Tong. He mentioned my statement on the Wi-Fi initiative for the PTSC. Now, when I made that statement, I was responding to a question from a member from the other side in the other place. Now, on March 26, 2012, and I'm quoting here from the Extras newspaper, the then Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fish, no, he was Minister of Transport, announced an initiative to put Wi-Fi on PTSC buses. That is where this comes from. Now, I cannot be held responsible for the fact that the PP failed in its attempt to do a simple thing like putting Wi-Fi on PTSC buses. So when the member accuses us of using Wi-Fi to spy on the public, what we are simply doing is fulfilling an election promise to do something which the PP attempted and failed miserably to do. With that, I take my seat. Thank you.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise this Friday, the 15th of April, 2016 at 7:17 and 28 seconds p.m. to close my first ever bill in terms of piloting bills as Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs in this Parliament, the 11th Parliament. We have heard, Madam Speaker, from, I think it is 12 speakers on the opposition bench in this debate. And we have heard from several speakers on our own government bench. And this debate, Madam Speaker, is geared squarely upon an amendment to the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506. Madam Speaker, you would notice that we spent a certain amount of time in days dealing with this debate. Because in piloting the bill, I was at pains to ensure, hopefully and achieve, the statement of the legitimate aim of legislation. That is a requirement, and the first requirement in dealing with the proportionality of legislation as it deals with constitutionality under the laws of Trinidad and Tobago and the Constitution. With that said, Madam Speaker, we next move to the issue of the amending legislation going only so far into the intrusion of rights, if there are any, as it ought to go. And then they must be reasonable in the intrusion, if any. Now, I've said that because there was one editorial read out by members opposite that suggested that I had not bothered to put forward proportionality in terms of checks and balances in legislation. And that, Madam Speaker, I wish to say, is entirely the opposite of the contribution given. I don't know, most respectfully, if those who reported didn't have access to the Parliament and its website and the Hansard, but members opposite, in particular the Honourable Member for Caroni Central, in fact traversed the very arguments that I put forward. What he went on to say after that was that he just, in the Honourable Member's opinion, didn't think that the argument went far enough. So let's deal, Madam Speaker, firstly with this issue of constitutionality. The issue of constitutionality was raised by approximately 12 members opposite. Members opposite allege that this bill requires a special majority. That would fall under Section 13 requirement of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, that where there is an intrusion in Section 4 or Section 5 rights, those are the enshrined rights in the Constitution, that you need to have 3/5 majority of the Parliament in this type of situation, and that it must also be right for a democracy such as Trinidad and Tobago. That, in law, second limb, is translated as it must be proportional. It must have a legitimate aim. The aim must only go so far as it needs to go, and it must be proportionate or balanced in its intrusion. That's why I started that way. None of the members opposite, however, have bothered to speak with specifics as to the current state of the law. There is a simple allegation made by members opposite, and I don't want to be uncharitable, but that allegation basically is that somehow this amending piece of law, which is in its entirety 5 clauses long, and which, according to the very jovial contribution of the member for Oropouche East, a well-lettered man who resides well in comedy, according to his contribution, is a cut-and-paste piece of law. It's a lazy piece of law. In all his years, he's never seen laziness like this in Parliament. Oropouche West. I recall distinctly East. Stuart, you did me wrong. I recall distinctly, Madam Speaker, sitting in the Senate when the Honourable Member for Oropouche East, as Minister of Housing, came to the Parliament, came to the Senate, and chastised the Parliament then for saying, why are we debating a particular piece of law? It's only the changing of the word "and" to "or." He delivered his contribution, and I gave the response for the opposition, and the debate ended immediately after that response, and the bill was allowed to lapse and never came back again. And I've raised that example because then Oropouche East came in as leader of government business quite bombastically, residing in these simple barbs that he is very comfortable with, making a bold statement that the law is this simple and you don't know what you're saying. But I wonder why he walked away then as the piloter of the bill for a whole 4 years, never to bring the bill back after only one contribution was made. And I made the point then, and I make it now, the law is not as simple as you make it out to be. And we must therefore be careful as legislators that we get it right. I am very, very concerned to make sure that we pass laws for the good governance of our country and that our laws can pass muster. But on the basis of constitutionality, Madam Speaker, if one were to disaggregate the arguments presented and say perhaps that there has been an intrusion in a section 4A or 4B of the Constitution rights, where the Constitution speaks to the respect for private life, there is no statement in our Constitution for a right of privacy. That's a matter of fact in the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. There is a recognition for private life. And in recognizing private life, there's been a plethora of law that has evolved in our Court of Appeal and also at the Privy Council, which essentially, and I'll put it in summary form, says, first of all, it's a fact that there's been no serious local judicial consideration of the right to respect private life. That's Section 4C of the Constitution. Helpful statements in our own appellate jurisdiction tell us in relation to Section 4 that it is not every act of Parliament which may impinge upon Section 4 rights of the Constitution. Section 4 and 5 rights may in fact be qualified and limited by general legislation, not 3/5 majority legislation, provided that it is in pursuit of a legitimate aim. Those rights are always subject to being given away, that is Section 4 and 5 rights, if they are tested against the public interest. And that's where proportionality comes in. The dicta in the Privy Council in particular, in the case of Surujrattan versus the Attorney General, 2007, that is to be found in 71 West Indian Law Reports at 391, Baroness Hale's dicta there is very persuasive in speaking to the fact that you can't just stand up and say, look, this thing infringes a 4 and 5 right, automatically you need a 3/5 majority. I've stressed on the point of the public interest because we've heard the Honourable Member for Princestown stand opposite and boldly say together with the member for Cumuto, Manzanilla. And I asked the member for Cumuto, Manzanilla, tell me your statistics. The honorable member for Princestown said it was TTPS statistics he read. And they said, somehow crime flourishes under the PNM. Never under the UNC. We solved crime. Cumuto Manzanilla was bold enough to say. We brought it down. She was bold enough to say. She didn't reflect when she was telling us that very tragic story, and I mean not to be pejorative in relation to her expressing and sharing her story of that very unfortunate incident in her family. But she didn't even reflect upon the fact that kidnapping for ransom under a PNM government went down to 0. And that it didn't happen by mistake. It happened, in fact, as a result of the use of intelligence-led policing. So what's the state of public interest in Trinidad and Tobago? They say, what have you done in the PNM? Well, the first thing I'd like to do is to correct the facts that Princestown put on the record. It is a fact that the detection and conviction rates in 2008 were at 15.9% for homicide. In 2009, they stood at 26.8%. In 2010, at 22.8%, down from 26%. 2011, down to 21.9%. 2012, down to 16.6%. 2013, down to 10.3%. 2014, down to under, as Orapooch put it, Orapooch East, down to under inflation rate. And today, with that downward trend coming straight down from 2010, they have the temerity to ask us, what are you all doing about crime? How has it flourished? The fact is, the report that has gone out in relation to Trinidad and Tobago, the United States report, says that there have been over 2,400 and something murders between 2010 to 2014. It is not true and honest and respectful to say that crime flourishes because one political party is in or another is not. And let me tell you why. Because the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the protective services, they are the ones charged with responsibility for doing detection, conviction, and police work. No minister, or no minister ought to, be caught dealing with policing himself. It's not a minister's prerogative, the honourable member for Point 14, to go and lock up people, or the Attorney General to be persecutorial in prosecuting crimes, as I called them in the past, pap smears, pre-action protocol smear campaigns, that bear no result, and you spend millions of dollars on it. What it is, Madam Speaker, it is important to enable the security forces to do their job. And when you eliminate the mechanism by which you surveil your borders, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, as an island sitting in the Caribbean Sea next to transshipment points in South America for drugs, arms, ammunition, trafficking in persons, and you shut it off, and you shut off the surveillance systems in Trinidad and Tobago, no wonder you can't understand what happened to crime if you can't understand that when you cannot police your borders, crime is going to increase. And it was a government's decision, the last UNC government's decision, to cancel border patrols. The Trinidad-class vessels of the OPVs, now called so by BAE Systems, because Brazil bought the Trinidad-class vessels and are using them and building 2 more. And the Royal Navy is building 2 Trinidad-class vessels, but we in Trinidad don't have one. Trinidad-class vessels. Apart from that, what did a government incoming do? This government, Madam Speaker, was very certain to take immediate control and delivery of vessels purchased by the last government. We didn't even bother to say, well, you know what? The vessel is 1/10 the size, costs the same price as the Trinidad-class BAE Systems, but we go take it. You know why we took it? The Chinese vessel included. You know why, Madam Speaker? Because the borders need protecting. And, Madam Speaker, you want to know why crime goes up? I want to share with you a statistic. I would like to share with you a statistic as I hear a drone want often to crosstalk and not contribute, ringing in my ears opposite me. But I want to say this. When you have security surveillance systems designed to stop communications from your prisons, where the anecdotal information and certified information at National Security Council is that hits, people's lives are being extinguished by instructions at the telephone in a prison's system where you are supposed to be deprived of liberty, and you have the equipment as a UNC government had, and you don't bother to turn it on, then you must expect something to happen. And you want to know what this government has done? This government has certainly turned on the monitoring, jamming, and grabbing equipment. And I want to share with this nation, through you, Madam Speaker, a little statistic. 99 days of operation, because believe you me, the Minister of National Security leading the charge, ably supported by those of us that support him, Prime Minister, head of National Security Council, said, get it done. And the systems went on. But here what the traffic flow looks like. 99 days of operationality. Listen to the number of calls blocked. 1,530,535 calls. SMS blocked. 126,247 SMS text messages blocked. Phones registered in the system, 364 phones in 1 out of 8 detention centers, jails in Trinidad and Tobago. In 1. Not the other 7 yet. 35 days of operation in another location. 379,864 phones jammed. Calls jammed. Text messages blocked. 48,581 text messages blocked. You want to know what we're doing? We're operationalizing the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and we're making sure that when you're in jail, you're in jail. You're deprived of your liberties. Madam Speaker, I went to the prisons myself on a tip-off that I received from a phone call from no less a place than death row. After the prisons had been publicly speaking to the fact that no contraband was found in the prisons, front page article, silence opposite no. Do you know what we found, Madam Speaker, in contraband at the prisons? The prisons officers, I compliment them, did the search whilst we observed them, because I have no locus to do any search at all, and I don't want it to be misquoted here. But I made sure in discharging my duty that I stood side by side with the Minister of National Security and suggested to them what they ought to do in their own powers. And we took a piece of equipment in the prisons, a scanner, where you could take pictures of the entire thing that you want to go. And I said, I want images of the entire thing. I don't want a hand one moving. Lo and behold, I won't tell you the thousands of items, but I'll give you the descriptions of them. Shavers, Wi-Fi spots, smoking devices, earpieces, cash, memory cards, SIM cards, headsets, razor blades, knives, digital scale, rounds of ammunition, lighters, cigarettes, cocaine, marijuana, cell phones, chargers, batteries, and get this, a 22-inch flat-screen TV. In our jails. In death row, under surveillance. Well, what we have decided to do as a government, the Prime Minister has said to us, and I don't often like to do this because he's not a man that looks for applause or for any praise, but he says to us, you have a job to do. If you're in charge, be in charge. Don't worry to threaten nobody. Because I was taught at school, he says, if you have to threaten somebody, you're wasting your time. Just do it. And so what we have been doing as a government is going down to the ground and dealing with the state of play in Trinidad. Now, I haven't just put this out for sensationalism. I'm addressing the point that I raised in law. Let me tie it in now. I've said Section 13 of the Constitution, dealing with proportionality in a society such as ours, that the public interest can outweigh a Section 4 and 5 right in the Constitution. That's the premise. That's how you tie statistics in with the law. For the record, members say they're going to challenge it in court. I welcome the challenge. But the fact is, Madam Speaker, there is nothing in this legislation that could speak to lack of proportionality. Madam Speaker, in dealing with further arguments raised, we were told that there's no due process in this argument. We were told that there's no balance in the argument. Let me explain the system as it exists right now. They complained, they said, boots on the ground, operational entities. Naparima, who's no longer with us, said boldly, the NOC was designed to be an entity for operational security. Really? Where was the NOC? Where is it currently? Who was running the NOC? How much staff they had? I want to start with where it is. The National Operations Center is a creature of supposed operationality from Naparima, parked in the office of the Prime Minister, taking directions and funding from the office of the Prime Minister, having an operational capacity set out in a UNC budget of $80 million. To do what? Sort helicopters, operational capacity. Really? They're comfortable with that? Billions of dollars spent in surveillance systems, CCTV cameras, doing surveillance of citizens using civilians. 2,000 plus cameras operated under their watch by 3 people by the time we got there. That's not the system now. Because they couldn't pay the salaries for the officers required to operate the surveillance cameras, CCTV in Trinidad. Big boasting about CCTV. 3 people manning 2,000 cameras. And they have the temerity to tell us today, tell us about the manpower, and tell us how you're going to pay for it, and tell us about the organizational structure, and let's go to Joint Select Committee, and let's appoint the director in the same manner in which you appoint a commissioner of police with selection criterion. Really? It is the member for Princestown himself, now leading a charge in the courts of Trinidad and Tobago, if his pre-action protocol is to be believed, to try to set aside the appointment of a commissioner of police mechanisms that we just brought to the parliament, where we said it is intolerable to take 3 years and $13 million to bring no commissioner of police to the table. The commissioner of police is required to supervise and run the police force under Section 123 of the Constitution. And we say it is intolerable for the police force to have a detection and conviction rate under 3%, under 5%, where that includes for homicides, suicide, and killing. So you know 2 people there, right there. 1 kills somebody and 1 kill himself after. That's the fact. We say it's intolerable. We say it is improper to have a National Operations Center which sits down under the office of the Prime Minister. We say bring that asset into the SSA and put it into the pure light of 2 very important things. The Auditor General of Trinidad and Tobago, the reports that come to Parliament from the SSA as one category, having the constitutional ability to have that Auditor General's report stripped apart. And they asked, don't tell us about Auditor General, what will that do? It was Auditor General that dealt with life sport. What happened with life sport? Where was the chorus line when Gary Griffith, as Minister of National Security, was in an open war with the Minister of Sport, Anil Roberts, saying, you are producing criminals by funding them in life sport. They fired the man for telling the truth. And they come to tell us today about that. Don't tell us about Auditor General. But what's the second limb? The second limb is under the standing orders of Trinidad and Tobago's Parliament, House of Representatives, Section 103, there shall be a committee on national security. And for those who don't know, Section 111 Standing Order speaks to the powers of a Joint Select Committee. And when you talk to the powers of a Joint Select Committee and you bring people before you and you have them accountable to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on live TV, where you make sure that you call for papers, for accounts, for documents, for personnel, as we did with the total today of policing, you're talking about bringing some shining, pure, cleansing light to the situation. And I consider that, most respectfully, proportionality by way of inspection, Madam Speaker. Certainly I do. They ask us, Madam Speaker, may I ask how much time I have till the absolute end of my contribution?
Stop at 7:47.
And there's no extension?
No extension.
Much obliged, ma'am. I wish I had more time. Let me address a few. Madam Speaker, "15 minutes after that. Much relieved and much obliged. Thank you, ma'am. Madam Speaker, we heard the honourable members opposite, apart from dealing with constitutionality, basically prescribed to us methodology to go to a Joint Select Committee when lying in front of them are volumes and volumes of documents which speak to plans by the UNC government, policies by the UNC government to amend the Strategic Services Agency Act. In 5 years, nothing was dealt with under that legislation. But right now, as the country is literally desperate for solution in terms of crime and criminality, we're told, let's go and think about it a little while longer. Because you are going too far. They say to us, Madam Speaker, listen to the point. They tell us that you should not have any form of expansion of powers. I would like honourable members to refer to the annual reports on the Strategic Services Agency of 2009, 2010, 2011, 12, 13 and 14, which chapter and verse of them speak to the SSA, firstly being the entity which is in law authorized by the Interception of Communication Act to surveil persons within due process. Secondly, it speaks to the SSA under their watch of having a director appointed in the manner that the law continues to say he shall be appointed. Thirdly, it's the same situation for the deputy director. Fourthly, and very importantly, it says that the business of the SSA over the years in these annual reports also includes surveillance for money laundering, firearms, trafficking, the very things which we're putting into the Act now in broadening the definition of serious crime, the very things are in the annual reports under the hand of their own people. But you see, they don't read their own material, I am convinced. It's easy just to stand up and say anything. And I'd like, as a person with some mixed ethnicity, to raise and address squarely a very ugly issue. I heard today, Madam Speaker, of something which upset me seriously. I heard speakers talk to the issue of race. Person after person raised an article written about unfair dismissal, racist request, axed SSA directors threatened suit, Al-Rawi no cabinet directive to fire based on race. For the record, I abhor the concept of racism, but I find it quite curious that when painted into a corner of having no ideas, no policies, and no explanation for what you did for 5 years, the first bogey to fly out your mouth is race. Look at what they say about Indian. Read the place about Indian. Oropuch East conveniently left out the fact that the lawyer acting for these allegations of race is none other than Anand Ramlogan. And, Madam Speaker, they've raised this issue of letters supposedly being written and who is this person, allegations being made. I'd like to put on the record, where was Anand Ramlogan give himself SC, Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, when 2 letters were written? One, headed secret, to the Honorable Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa, from Senior Superintendent Surujrattan Prasad. Date 15th October 2010. Subject, Security Intelligence Agency, SIA, illegal tapping of telephones. At 12:15 p.m. I read, Monday, October 2010, 11th. I was contacted by the Honorable Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa, at Special Branch Headquarters via telephone number 624 whatever. The Prime Minister voiced her concerns over illegal activities of Mr. Nigel Clement, Director of the SIA, whom she said was in the process of transcribing tapes that contained her private conversations with persons. The Prime Minister instructed that the matter be investigated and steps be taken to stop Mr. Clement from carrying out his illegal activities. The Prime Minister calling a policeman without going through the Commissioner of Police to say she, as an executive member, has evidence on somebody who doing something which in her opinion is a fact, off to deal with them. This letter. Approximately 130 employees, watchful eyes of Mr. Clement for the Opposition People's National Movement. Reports are that they shared with the former head of Special Anti-Crime Unit, Brigadier Peter Joseph. Mr. Clement, in addition to the above, the following persons are very loyal to Clement and still maintain close links with the PNM and occupy senior and influential positions at SIA, and then they name 25 persons.
Highly trained.
Highly trained.
Honorable Member, your 30-minute speaking time has expired. Leader of the...
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 15.5, I beg to move that the House continue to sit until the conclusion of the matter before it.
Honorable members, the question is that the House continue to sit until the conclusion of this bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Honorable Attorney General, your 30 minutes have expired. Do you intend to avail yourself of the additional 15 minutes? You may proceed.
So, Madam Speaker, 15 minutes being tight, I want to dive to the root of this. The letter from Surujrattan Prasad goes on. Now, I want to put a pin for a moment. Trinidad and Tobago would well recall when we were dealing with the Interception of Communication Act, that the Prime Minister, no less a person then, Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa, member for Siparia, now leader of opposition, came and said 2 unknown Israeli members were in Trinidad and Tobago, that the evidence which she had on the files that were given to her from the SIA raid could no longer be found, that these unknown Israeli people disappeared with the information. Here the letter, written to her. At present, there are 2 Israeli nationals in the country assisting the SIA spy equipment. One of the Israeli nationals is identified as Haim Raimf, project manager from New York, arrived in Trinidad and Tobago on Caribbean Airlines flight number 1, the number's a little bit blotty here, 1258 it seems, at 1:58 p.m. on the 10th of the 11th, on flight number 523. He was born on 1958-1203 and holds Israeli passport number 100202229. At present, he's staying at the Hilton Hotel. The other Israeli national was identified as Adam, and then it goes on. If I could only bring a motion of privilege today for an untruth told in 2010, I wish I could. Because this must have been in the hands of Siparia as Prime Minister.
Yes.
What we have since found out, files didn't disappear. The information given to me, which I accept as information, showing Princess Town how to do it, is that those files were delivered to the home of Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa as the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago at her request.
Wow.
You want to talk about letters? You must be careful with strings you pull.
Caroni Central.
Madam Speaker, I told you there are 2 letters. Here the other one. The other letter is from Senior Superintendent Special Branch, Subject SIA, Police Exercise Wiretapping, and I'll dive to the guts of it. They go on about a sting, they got a tip-off, they did etc. Listen to the recommendations that come out, flowing out of the Prasad recommendations, etc. Country always wanted to know where Reshmi Ramnarayan came from. I'm about to tell you. Comments. The situation at the SIA warrants immediate attention. If sensitive information from that unit is allowed to be clandestinely sent to the leading members of the PNM, it would undermine the legitimate constituted government of Trinidad and Tobago and ultimately lead to its downfall. Recommendations. A. Director of SIA as well as persons mentioned at paragraph 4 and 5 of the report should be relieved of their positions immediately in order to safeguard the flow of sensitive information to the PNM. Stick a pin. That was done. And worse yet, it was paid for when Brigadier Joseph was fired at the airport. What they didn't tell you after that, millions of dollars in settlement paid by the taxpayers of this country. Nigel Clement, as he was summarily dismissed as we find out now, had to bring a claim against the state. You know what the state did under AG Anand Ramlogan? Give himself SC? No defense. Judgment in default of defense. Damages to be quantified. State of emergency. I had a file come across my desk the other day telling me we have to deal with certain information. I said, well, ask the last Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. So I wrote to the SG and had the SG write the Prime Minister to ask for the reasons for the state of emergency because we need them in court. You know what the answer is? Effectively? None. None. I don't know. Brigadier Sandy can't tell me, Anand Ramlogan can't tell me, and Kamla Prasad Bisesa, and I'm saying member for Siparia, can't tell this country. So I want to know what the cost of that is going to be. Second recommendation, an interim management committee headed by SIA's Reshmi Ramnarayan, open brackets, technical operator, and Carlton Denny, open brackets, surveillance operator, Special Branch Acting Inspector Dulam Reka, former coordinator, and Karon Ganpat, analyst at the National Security Council Secretariat, should be appointed immediately.
Done.
Done?
All done.
And today we get in article read out from the same Denny, and Ramlogan give himself SC as well. And they want to raise this head that this is some allegation of racism. I'm connecting the dots for the population here through you, Madam Speaker. This is scandalous. When you think people will not have the truth in their hands, when you raise 11 speakers in a row invoking race in this country in 2016. And then Naparima has the gall to call my grandfather's name in his mouth.
Shame.
What the grandfather giveth, the grandson taketh away, he says. Well, I show my grandfather ashes blowing in the wind, jittery and all, that he is in fact the member for Naparima today. Madam Speaker, I think it's time to put the race bogey to bed. It's intolerable. Madam Speaker, let's deal with a few of the other observations. Members wanted to know why 5 years. Let me just refresh members' memory. First of all, in the quick time that I have, the proportionality in this bill, and to debunk the argument that there is too much power being given, surveillance is conducted only under the auspices of the interception of communication legislation. That legislation allows for wide surveillance for anything. Economic interests, national security. The Data Protection Act, which is not fully operationalized, Part 1 has been assented to, Part 2, Section 7 to 18, Section 22, 23, 24, and one other section have been proclaimed. The public sector mechanisms, because the Act binds the state, have not kicked in, but personal information and sensitive personal information, which includes criminal records or surveillance records, are exempted from the Act. The Interception of Communication Act says that it is only under that Act that 3 people can intercept: Commissioner of Police, Chief of Defense Staff, and the Director of the SSA. And Anand Ramlogan and Kamla Prasad Bisesa, member for Siparia, had nothing to say about that when they put that in the law in 2010. And I too have nothing to say about that, because we didn't then, nor do we now, because of the proportionality of due process with judicial inspection, the fact that the law prescribes that the evidence must be destroyed, that there's limited purpose, it can't be used in court. Proportionality. But that would require discipline, honorable members opposite, because you'll have to discipline yourselves to read the laws. You'll have to read the Interception of Communications Act. You'll have to read the Data Protection Act and its proclamation sections. You'd have to marry those together with the existing Defense Act, with the Commissioner of Police. There is proportionality and balance. Who staffs the SSA? Police officers under the supervision by way of secondment of the police. Customs, Public Service Commission, and the police officers, when they are seconded, honorable members, don't just lose the balance of the Police Service Commission and the Police Complaints Authority. They're still obliged to be measured by it. So what nonsense, most respectfully, must we be fed and listened to? It shows a blatant ignorance of the law, Madam Speaker. It is obstructionism.
They want to mislead the population.
So when you are hearing this panic and fire and prevail and malintent and race, Molotov cocktail,
Well responsible.
letters, and they only tell you half the story. Well, Madam Speaker, you may not have noticed, this government has been disclosing information to create statistical bedrocks on the reforms. I heard the members opposite, this fellow making jokes down in the corner, what's his name? Oropuchist, talk about legislative agenda, where we get a statement, we get the agenda. 6 years sat down as leader of government business and didn't have the courage to publish one. Published today, 42 bills this year, going straight down to 2020. He didn't get the legislative agenda. Well, perhaps he should listen. I said, most respectfully, that it would be given to the Parliament for publication. The standing orders provide, and the courtesy provides that we circulate the statement. But was he asleep for 5 years as leader of government business?
He was.
What was he busy doing?
Printing money.
So, Madam Speaker,
I am more than Holland.
relative to offences, just let me quickly put on the record. Tipping off, $5 million fine is 5 years imprisonment. Failure to disclose money for money laundering, only a 3-year imprisonment. Failure to report complex, unusual, large transactions, 2 years imprisonment. Failure to suspicious transactions, 2 years imprisonment. Failure to comply with financial obligations, regulations, 2 years imprisonment. Company commits an offence under the Proceeds of Crime Act, 2 years imprisonment. Failure to disclose information relating to property used for commission for offences under the Anti-Terrorism and the FIU, 5-year imprisonment. Director or CEO or partner of a listed business or a financial institution withholding information, 3 years imprisonment. Failure to disclose information, disclosure improperly of information received from the FIU, 3 years imprisonment. Disclosure of investigations into STRs, suspicious transaction activities and records, 3 years. All of the money laundering and anti-terrorism offences are under 5 years. Why are the members opposite so antsy and concerned to keep the bar 10 years? Why? Did you bother to do a traversing of the matrix of laws that apply in this country and understand that corruption and money laundering is a #1 issue? Or is it that you just want the status quo to stay so? $3.7 billion in suspicious transaction activities in 1 year in this country, where the cash forfeiture is only $250,000 only, TT. Well, I'll tell you this. We have the pleasure today of saying that we have put into effect the Seized Asset Committee for the Proceeds of Crime Act by the Cabinet, which has not been done since the law was passed. Why would you want to leave that so? So when I hear the panic come from members opposite, most respectfully, it betrays any form of study, perspective, interrogation, and it looks and smells like pure, unadulterated fright. Because it defies logic for someone as well-lettered as Oropuch East to stand up in the manner in which he presents his comical debates and talk the way he does. And notice he never sticks around to hear what I have to tell him. Not once in the Parliament. I hope he's listening. So, Madam Speaker, most respectfully, serious crime as defined is something which is broad. It allows the SSA to have inspection of it under the Interception of Communication Act with the balance of the Data Protection Act, because you must keep it but you can't disclose it. MAPA versus the UK for DNA and privacy rights does not apply in this instance. If you read the case, you'd know that. Because that pertained to the right to have your records destroyed. The court frowned upon the indefinite retention of fingerprints and DNA evidence. Our laws, Administration of Justice Diribonucleic Acid Act 2012 or 2011, does not provide for that. There's a method of destruction. The Interception of Communication, method of destruction. Data Protection Act, method of destruction. But you've got to read the laws. Do you know what the leader of the opposition had the temerity to say to us after the first day? Well, I have no staff. Or they could draft the amendments for me. You heard what I had to say. But we don't have any staff. And I had to point out to the Honourable Member for Siparia, when I had no staff, as a single opposition senator, they made sure, and I made sure, that I produced 240 amendments overnight on the Children's Act 2012, when we went to 6:30 a.m. that morning doing the committee stage. Because Dr. Rowley said to us as leader of the opposition, if you're in charge and you have something to do, you better make sure you continue doing your job properly. Because you only have one opportunity to do your job right the first time. Madam Speaker, this bill is proportionate. It's necessary in a society such as Trinidad and Tobago, where we respect democracy. It's long overdue. The detection and conviction rates are unacceptable. It's time to give in public interest the assistance that we need, well balanced by the other articulating laws, and I beg to move.
Honourable members, Honourable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency be now read a second time. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency.
Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, as provided by Standing Order 68-1, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency be committed to the Committee of the Whole.
Honourable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency be committed to the Committee of the Whole. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. The House will now go into Committee of the Whole to consider the bill clause by clause. Clause 1. The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. The question is that Clause 1 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 1 now stands part of the bill. Clause 2. The question is that Clause 2 stand part of the bill. The question is that Clause 2 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 2 now stands part of the bill. Clause 3. The question is that Clause 3 stand part of the bill. The question is that Clause 3 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 3 now stands part of the bill. Clause 4. The question is that Clause 4 stand part of the bill. The question is that Clause 4 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 4 now stands part of the bill. Clause 5. The question is that Clause 5 stand part of the bill. The question is that Clause 5 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clause 5 now stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the bill be now reported to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. The ayes have it. The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to report that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency, was considered in the Committee of the Whole and approved without amendments. I now beg to move that the House agree with the committee's report.
Honorable members, the question is that this House agree with the committee's report on a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agencies Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the function of the Strategic Services Agency. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
No division required.
Mr. Al-Rawi?
Aye.
Dr. Rowley?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson-Regis?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mr. Dialsing?
Aye.
Mr. Hines?
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell?
Aye.
Ms. Kojo?
Aye.
Mr. Antwine?
Aye.
Mrs. Critchlow-Coburn?
Aye.
Mr. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Dillon?
Aye.
Mrs. Webster-Roy?
Aye.
Dr. Gatsby Dolly?
Aye.
Ms. Oliver, Mr. Cuffie,
Aye.
Mr. Garcia,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Dr. Francis,
Aye.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Jennings Smith,
Aye.
Ms. McDonald,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
No.
Mr. Karen,
No.
Dr. Rambachan,
No.
Dr. Tewarie,
No.
Mrs. Newallo-Hosein,
No.
Mrs. Gayadeen Gopi Singh,
No.
Mr. Indar Singh,
No.
Mr. Padarath,
No.
Dr. Bodo,
No.
Mr. Parry,
No.
Ms. Ramdial,
No.
Honorable members, I declare the result of the division as follows: 21 members for, 11 members against. The Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency be forthwith read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency be forthwith read a third time and pass. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Al-Rawi,
Aye.
Dr. Rowley,
Aye.
Mrs. Robinson-Regis,
Aye.
Mr. Young,
Aye.
Mr. Dialse,
Aye.
Mr. Hines,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell,
Aye.
Ms. Kojo,
Aye.
Mr. Antwine,
Aye.
Mrs. Critchlow-Coburn,
Aye.
Mr. Ford,
Aye.
Mr. Dillon,
Aye.
Mrs. Webster-Roy,
Aye.
Dr. Gatsby-Dolly,
Aye.
Mr. Cuffie,
Aye.
Mr. Garcia,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Francis,
Aye.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Jennings Smith,
Aye.
Ms. McDonald,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
No.
Mr. Karim,
No.
Dr. Rambachan,
No.
Dr. Tewarie,
No.
Mrs. Newallo-Hosein,
No.
Mrs. Gayadeen Gopi Singh,
No.
Mr. Indar Singh,
No.
Mr. Padarath,
No.
Dr. Bodo,
No.
Mr. Parry,
No.
Ms. Ramdial,
No.
Madam Speaker, the result of the division is as follows: 21 members voting for, 11 members voting against.
Honorable members, I declare the result of the division is as follows: 21 members for, 11 members against.
Bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act, Chapter 1506, to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency.
The Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the House do now adjourn to Friday, the 22nd of April, 2016 at 1:30 p.m., at which time we'll be doing private members. And Madam Speaker, I'd like to have the Acting Chief Whip indicate what will be done on that day, please.
Member for Point Appeal.
Madam Speaker, at this point in time, I would have to defer. At this point in time, I don't have the information what we'll be debating at this point. Huh?
Sorry.
No.
Order.
Well, on the private, I mean.
Order, please, members.
Two motions that we have on the order paper. Both. We have the ADD motion and also the other motion that is, pardon?
Which one you doing?
We're doing one. Number one, the ADD motion.
Thank you.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do adjourn to Friday, 22nd April 2016 at 1:30 p.m. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to Friday, 22nd April 2016 at 1:30 p.m.